Hello. Tempests and Slaughter. I got the book last month. I read it the first time in about 10 days, and I read it the second time in 2 days. I enjoyed this book way more than I thought that I would. I am not Numair Salmaline's biggest fan, but in this book, he is Arram Draper. He starts the book actually 10 years old, but because he's a liar, he tells people that he's 11 and does not end that lie at any point throughout the book, but he is 14 at the end of the book. If you are coming to this video cold to Tamora Pierce, you don't really know her, you don't think you've read any of the books in her series, but somehow you clicked on this video because magecraft is interesting to you or something else led you here, I will not be offended if you pause this video shortly and go to the library and get this book to read it and come back next week to finish the rest of this video, because there will be spoilers in here of whatever I want to say. I have notes. I don't have a script for this one. It will be spoilers for Tempests and Slaughter. It will be spoilers for the Immortals series especially, but for other books taking place in the eastern and southern lands of Tamora Pierce's created fantasy world. This book takes place 100% in Carthag of the southern continent across the inland sea from Tortall. It takes place, I believe, concurrently with the events of the Song of the Lioness series and is the prequel. It will be a prequel series. Right now it's just the one book to the Immortals series where Numair is the other main character besides Dane. If you read this book first before the others, your reading experience, I believe, will be enriched because of the world building that Tamora Pierce was able to include in this book that the limited page space of the earlier series published in the 1980s and the 1990s was not afforded to her. So you will be able to bring that from Tempests and Slaughter to those books if you read Tempests and Slaughter first. If you've read some Tamora Pierce books, but the Immortal series is not one of them, I would also recommend reading Tempests and Slaughter before you get to the Immortals, because several characters have their fates essentially in the Immortal series, and so if you don't want to know what that fate is before you read Tempests and Slaughter, you should, go ahead and read it first. But having said that, the fates of those characters very much influences at least my reading of Tempests and Slaughter. One of the less favorite aspects of this book that I picked up on watching videos of people's reviews and commentaries about Tempests and Slaughter was that Numair kind of seemed to be the specialist boy. He had the most power, he had these good friends, he had this individualized attention from the mage masters at the university, despite the fact that he's younger than basically everybody else, and odd events and things keep happening. And yes, that's completely true, but that's also kind of the point in two different ways. One, power attracts power, both magical power and political power. And Numair has vast magical power and is roommates with one of the imperial heirs, so he has direct access to political power, and even if he didn't have that, he is being guided in that direction anyway by at least some of his masters, and he doesn't seem to realize that. At least I'm not sure how much he realizes that from this book being 11 to 14 years old at this point. And then the other part of him sort of being handed all these possibilities and potentials and access and power is the fact that if you know the Immortals, you know he doesn't get to keep any of it. He loses everything. So I read this book. I didn't cry. I didn't even tear up, which is usually something that happens for me when I read Tamora Pierce's books. It's one of the things I love about her writing. But I did laugh more than once. Actually threw back my head laughing at some Easter eggs that are, in my opinion, sort of love letters to longtime fans, but also just character dialogue, relationships, and interactions that were intended to be amusing and are. What I kind of anticipate if we do ever get book 2, and I really hope we do get book 2, even if we don't get all of the Numair Chronicles in time. But book 2, I would expect everything that he has been given and has gained in this book gets taken away. We will experience him losing everything that he got in this book. That is what I predict for book 2. So what is the plot of this book? It's his education and it's his relationships. That is the main core. It's actually the relationships with his two closest friends and with his teachers is the primary core of this story. But around that core is the political intrigue that Arram is unwilling to give too much attention to. He's not interested in power, so he's not paying attention to politics and ambition. He's paying attention to his studies. That does make him genuine for Ozorne. Ozorne, his roommate, the imperial heir, the ambitious one who for a long time buried his ambition because he was so far away from the throne, but things have been happening in the background and he's getting closer to the throne. And however much he might try to play it off that he would rather just be a mage left alone and not involved in imperial affairs, the more involved Arram becomes as he gets older, the more it's very clear to the reader that Ozorne is perfectly happy to gain more power, and being a mage makes him a more powerful imperial. Having Arram, the most powerful, as his best friend and roommate gives Ozorne even more power, but Arram hasn't seen that yet. Arram doesn't realize that he is the number one threat to Ozorne's primary teacher and mage master. So there's that. And then less obscure is Aram's internal journey from, at the beginning of the book, he has lived in Carthag for the last 5 years. It's where he has predominantly had his education, completely separate from most of his family. He knows his family back in Tyran loves him. They send him whatever he needs. And his father, at least, does make a long journey once a year to see Arram. At the beginning of the book, we learn, however, that the needs of the family and the business require him are not going to allow him to come and visit Arram, essentially for the rest of this book. We do not see his family. They send him gifts because they still support and love him, but we don't see them, and he doesn't think too much about them. Carthag is his where he has lived. The university is his home, and now with this book, he has these awesome friends and these fantastic teachers. The only problem is Carthag is a slavery-dependent empire. Where Arram is from, Tyra is a non-slave country. So his foundation as a person would have been in a non-slave holding country. And where he is receiving his education at the university, because there are so many people who come from other non-slave holding countries, the university does not use enslaved people for its functioning at all. So for a long time, Arram is not really encountering slaves except for when he goes shopping, which I imagine is also in the company of like adults. So he's got other things to focus on besides the people around him. Well, this book he's reaching the point where that's no longer the case. He's really starting to notice it, and he is deeply uncomfortable with other people being enslaved. And that progresses throughout the book up till the end when he settles on he can't stay in Carthag as long as Carthag is a slavery-dependent empire. He's best friends with Ozorne. He's had a conversation with him about, why don't you try to free the slaves? Why don't we see about making this happen? And Ozorne's not interested. At the end of the book, Arram essentially hopes that he will still be able to persuade Ozorne to do something to reduce the slavery situation in Carthag, if not disassemble it entirely. But he also realizes that if not, he won't be able to remain in Carthag. That will not be okay with him. And the book is all about how he comes to that, centered around the two polar places where where Arram spends his time. Is the university is protected, he is valued, he is under observation, and he's aware that he is constantly being watched, but I think he's not yet aware of what degree to which he is really being groomed to be a tool of the Empire. Contrasting that is his experiences with the Coliseum, the gladiatorial Coliseum. The opening chapter has Arram having lied to his father and grandfather so that he can get down closer to the rail so he can see the gladiators when they're coming out. This is his first real time at the games because he hasn't had friends his own age or anyone else to go with him. His dad and his grandfather think this will be a fun thing for him, and he does too. He quickly discovers that he can't stand the violence and the bloodshed. But before he does learn that, he gets dropped over the rail by a grown man that he called stupid, and luckily for him, a gladiator catches him before he hits the ground and then helps him to climb back up the wall to get away before the arena guards can catch Arram and probably beat him before sending him back to his parents. So as far as 10-year-old Arram is concerned after that moment, this gladiator is his friend. This person has just saved his life. And now this person is about to be in combat, is possibly going to die, while thousands of people are screaming for that bloodshed. Arram is not okay with that. Goes on through the book, and then about a year later, I wrote down the year, so let's see. So he's 10 at that point when he is a spectator and he falls into the arena and he realizes that he does not like the violence and the bloodshed, and he meets a slave and the gladiator who saved him named Musenda. He, for the next year or more, leaves offerings to the gods to keep Musenda safe, even though it was only this one interaction. And he doesn't want to ask anybody about this particular gladiator. He doesn't really want to know if he's been killed. He just leaves offerings hoping that he's okay. A year and a half or so later, when he is 11 or 12, because he has such raw natural power, one of his masters of stones takes him to the arena to help with a repair. This second encounter with the Coliseum is within the arena from that workers' standpoint, and there he encounters Musenda again, and that solidifies their relationship because they recognize each other. It was quite a unusual event to have the boy fall into the arena, and Arram shakes his hand like he's a person because he is, and he points out that not everybody does that. That interaction passes. He meets Musenda again during a plague outbreak and also meets some of Musenda's family who is not enslaved. So he's 10, he's 11, now he's 12 or 13. This time he is at the arena as an imperial guest accompanying Ozorne. Ozorne's mother, the princess, is there. He meets the emperor there. The emperor's third in line heir is also there. So it's a big deal. And Arram's not having a good time. He's not looking forward to seeing more people die. He's not looking forward to the possibility of seeing Musenda killed. He doesn't like the idea that Musenda's family is there and could also see him killed on that day. He prays, and it seems that one of the goddesses notices. The Graveyard Hag, it seems, has noticed because she leaves him a token. And Musenda does have the victory in the arena. Now, it's one of those things that he had to have the skills in the first place in order for the goddess to tip things in his favor, and he was able to do it without killing. So Arram has gone from spectator to repairman to imperial guest, honored by the emperor and recognized by the gladiatorial champion of the day. The book progresses, they encounter each other again a couple of times. All of these encounters are in the nature of the Coliseum and the university and the palace all having interactions, and Arram moving in that sphere. And then the end of the book, his final interaction with the Coliseum is as a medic. He is working in the hospital during the 2 weeks of summer training camp for the gladiators, for the new gladiators, and for the opening day of the games. In a way, Tempests and Slaughter is very different from Tamora Pierce's previous books, while at the same time being exactly the same in that some of the themes have been what Tamora Pierce has been working with all along. Alana, in the Song of the Lioness, right at the beginning of the first book, is told she has a great capacity to kill. She has a great magical gift. The gods give their gifts and intend for them to be used. She has a great capacity to heal. She must use that capacity to heal to make up for the lives that she is going to take. Numair has great capacity for power. He is not pursuing a future where he expects to kill, but he does see it as his responsibility to use the gifts he's been given to heal in whatever ways that he can. And then the other theme that's always been present throughout Tamora Pierce's works is the anti-slavery sentiments. And in this one, instead of them just being the de facto of the protagonist, it shows his journey to, no, I really can't accept this. And it's going to lead into, I'm sure, in book 2, what he's going to do to try and dismantle it. So here forward in this video, I'm just going to kind of talk about Tempests and Slaughter in context of what I predict for book 2. I have no idea what book 2 would be called. I have no idea if we will ever get book 2, but I know book 2 is supposed to exist, and canonically, the events of book 2 exist as having happened, because we have Tempests and Slaughter as the beginning, we have the Immortals series as the ultimate outcome. I predict that Arram will destroy the Coliseum in book 2. I'm not totally sure if I think it will be intentional or accidental, but I'm like 90% sure it's going to be an active decision on his part, and I think it's going to involve fire. In Tempests and Slaughter, there's huge water elements throughout the whole book. The beginning of the book, he has a flooding incident in the classroom, which gets the attention of the head mage of the university, or the head of the school of mages. And at the end of the book, he uses a flooding fountain to rescue Ozorne from an assassin. That's in Tempests and Slaughter. I foresee the next book being a book of fire, and he's going to destroy the arena. One of the other reasons I absolutely think that the Coliseum is going to get destroyed in book 2 is because it's been said. Ozorne's master, mage master, Chioke, I think that might be how you say his name, he is an ambitious jerk. And at one point he pushes Arram to show him his fire-wielding abilities. And they are, because he has huge power, fire is really hard for him to control, and he does not use it very much. But now Chioke sees what he is potentially capable of, and he mentions it in front of the Emperor and the Emperor's chief imperial mage. And it's the chief imperial mage who says, well, let's not destroy the Coliseum. So it's going to happen. I'm completely confident that if that book gets published, it's going to happen. So that's my first number 1 theory. I think that will probably be the end of the book. That will be the climactic thing of the book. I think also in book 2, Arram is going to help Musenda escape. Now, I've had some back and forth thoughts about this one, but I think he's going to help him escape before he himself leaves Carthag. I think possibly the betrayal that Ozorne obliquely accuses Numair of in Emperor Mage is potentially that he somehow, like in Prince of Egypt, remember how Ramesses wanted to, I am the morning and the sun, I can make it so that it never was? And Ozorne's going to kind of try and pull that thing about Musenda for Arram. It's either going to be that Arram keeps the secret about helping Musenda escape from Ozorne, and that's the betrayal, or it's going to be somehow Ozorne knows about it and makes it go away, and yet Arram still leaves, so that's that kind of betrayal. The big deal with Ozorne and Arram too, so Arram never asks Ozorne for anything, and that matters to Ozorne. He trusts him completely. Arram and Varys, their other best friend, just brings out the best in Ozorne. But unfortunately, everything else around Ozorne is conspiring to encourage the worst in him. Ambition, revenge, power hungriness, pettiness. One of the other predictions that I have for potential book 2, there are several incidences throughout Tempests and Slaughter where Ozorne points out to people, I have a long memory. There's a lot of incidents where you might have expected him to turn to violence, and he doesn't. I expect that's going to come back in book 2. There's an incident early on in the when Ozorne and Arram first become roommates, where a couple of people try to break into their room, and Arram goes to get the floor proctor or the guards or something to get the intruders out, and it mentions, as far as Arram can tell, the men are unharmed. Random things aren't in these books by and large. If it's being noted that it doesn't look like the men don't appear to be harmed, in Tamora Pierce's books, odds are not all things are as they appear. Ozorne has always had a sadistic side. Arram chooses to deceive himself and see the sadistic jokes that Ozorne and sometimes Varys make as just jokes and not promises for future occurrences. But I do see them as promises for future occurrences. Another potential for book 2 that I anticipate is Arram losing more teachers. One teacher was murdered in this book. She probably in some way was involved in the assassination of one of the imperial heirs, and that plot thread will be pursued, and he will lose, I think, at least another teacher. I have a list of 3 teachers who I think will be killed. If you know the book, these are the 3 that I think will be killed. Sibo, his water master, Cosmas, the head mage of the School of Mages, and Yadin, Arram's teacher of stone magic and of juggling. The juggling actually matters. It actually makes perfect sense. That was one of the moments that I threw back my head and laughed, because I knew what it was in there for, and it made perfect sense. Another prediction I have for the next book is, so Numair has been training to be a healer, and he has had mostly success with it throughout Tempests and Slaughter. There's a character, Tristan, who you may know from Wolfspeaker, is kind of a frenemy and will say cutting things often. And well, I think one of his cutting remarks about Numair making mistakes, or excuse me, Arram making mistakes, is foreshadowing. Numair has had his thoughts too about his worry about his level of power when it comes to the delicacy of human tissue. So I think in book 2, something is going to happen and he's going to lose control. Either it's going to be a situation where it's kind of his fault, he loses focus, he loses his train of thought, and the patient suffers or dies because of it, or he will get distracted by something outside of his control, will lose his temper, and that will cause harm or death to a patient, and he will take that very hard. So that is another prediction that I have for book 2. Next, one of Arram's teachers in Tempests and Slaughter is Lindhall Reed. We meet him the first time in Emperor Mage. Spoilers, we know from Emperor Mage that the only reason Lindhall Reed stayed in Carthag was because he was in some way helping enslaved people escape to the northern continent and the non-slave holding countries. That was the only reason he was staying in Carthag all this time. In Tempest and Slaughter, there are only 2 super subtle hints that might be something that he is doing. They're so subtle that I'm not even totally sure that they're meant to be taken that way, but that is how I take them from my reading and familiarity with Emperor Mage. And one of the predictions I have is that in the next book, Numair Arram is going to participate in that in some capacity. The 2 hints, in case you're wondering, is early on when Arram is still 10 years old, but lying that he's 11 and receiving this first semi-independent specialized education. Lindhall Reed is like, he's much too young. I only work with students that are at least 17. What that tells me is, although I'm sure not all of his students are involved in helping enslaved people escape, he doesn't want to involve minors if he can help it, because if there is ever some sort of discovery and crackdown, it's not too hard to imagine that anyone involved with Lindhall Reed would be swept up in it, whether or not they were involved, and he doesn't want that to include children. So that's the first hint that I think is a hint. And then at the very end of the book, that I also think is intended as a hint, but it's still very subtle, after Arram has spent his 2 or 3 weeks working with the gladiators at the bottom of the Coliseum and the arena training grounds, Lindhall says, I'm sure your experiences will be very useful or very helpful for me. He is the mage master of the animal studies. He is the lead of he is in charge of the royal menagerie. So what would he possibly have to do with the gladiators in the Coliseum? If you don't have that pre-knowledge, I doubt that would stand out to you, but I do, and I do see those, and I do think those are in there as the hints of what Lindhall Reed has going on and what I predict. And Arram will become involved with that in book 2. And now, getting involved with that is probably going to have a negative impact on most of his relationships, because even his future lover, Varese, a very kind and compassionate and smart person, isn't interested in resisting the slavery system that she's benefiting from. And so as Arram goes deeper into that side of himself, his compassion and his morality, that is going to pull him away from the relationships that don't support that. Varese and Ozorne, and probably some of his other masters who are grooming him to be a tool for Carthag. And then the last prediction that I want to mention would actually be for book 3, if we ever get that far. I don't think Arram will see his family in book 2, or at least not go to Tyra to his family. I think that would occur in book 3 when he is on the run in his initial years in Tortall, but he won't be able to stay. Either because legally, I think his family sort of signed his care and autonomy over to the university to cover his education in the end, the specialized education that he has received. So they may not legally be able to help him whether or not they want to, or they will try to help him irrespective of whether or not that legal sign over actually happened, but they'll be in danger if they do. Ozorne is incredibly vengeful. He either will hurt Arram's family, or the potential of him hurting his family will keep Arram from staying or going there in the end. Okay, next thing I want to get to, we're almost done, is regarding the video I did for Numair before this one. After I reread the Immortals series, how I felt about Numair and what I was bringing into this read of Tempests and Slaughter. I was correct. I think about everything in that video, almost to a one-to-one. Things that I complained about. For example, Numair's forgetfulness and how that wasn't really demonstrated in the Immortals series in any plot irrelevant way. Within Tempests and Slaughter, he consistently forgets wax earplugs on occasions where he knows he's going to need them, and people who care about him have them for him. So that's an example. The academic-based rambles that give information and support world building and also characterization, we get that in this book. And that Numair is a liar. He is a liar. I think I emphasized that at the beginning, and so that it's true. But it's just a go along to get along kind of lying that he does, a self-deception kind of lying so that he doesn't consider the more sadistic aspects of his closest friends. All right, and the very last thing is this cover. I do not understand what this gold-dipped, dripping feather is supposed to symbolize. I'm going to spoil some more. In the end of Emperor Mage, Ozorne is transformed into a Stormwing, which is an immortal bird person creature, mostly steel feathers, torso and face of a human, torso and head of a human. This doesn't look like a steel feather. In this book, there is a magical bird, a sunbird by the name of Preet, that has the ability to disguise itself and predominantly disguises itself as a small black bird. This is a bluish, mostly feather, but in some lights, blackbird feathers can look blue, I guess. So is this that? But, and that would even make some sense with the gold coloring, but why is it dripping gold? I really don't know what this cover is supposed to symbolize, and I have just, I think, shown you how deeply I pick apart and think about a book that I've read only twice. If anybody has any ideas of what this is supposed to be besides what, in addition to what I've already said, please leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. And I guess I also hope that whatever follows this will tie into it, or book 2 will reveal something about this. Imperial gold melting off of a hawk's feather, maybe? Okay, we'll go with that. Thank you for being here. That's all I'm going to say. I'm sure this video is long enough. If you want me to talk more about Tempests and Slaughter, let me know, because I do have more to say. If you have questions, leave that in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. It helps this little channel grow. And if you enjoyed Tamora Pierce content, it might be worth it for you to subscribe. If you enjoyed Tamora Pierce content, it might be worth it for you to just describe this channel. Sure. And if you enjoyed this content, it might be worth it for you to... Oh my gosh. Okay. And if you enjoy Tamora Pierce and this kind of content, it might be worth it for you to subscribe to this channel, because there's going to be more Tamora Pierce stuff that I'm going to go on about. And once again, thank you for taking the time to check this out, and I will see you with the next video.